Hi, I'm Erica Loomis, the owner of Little Fabric Shop. We put together a quick video on how to join quilt binding ends to create a mitered finish. For this project, you're going to need fabric shears, quilting pins, a fabric erasable marker, a small quilt ruler, binding clips, your prepared quilt sandwich. This one's already finished, so one without the binding, and your binding ready to go. Links to all of these notions are below. Step 1. Attach your binding as you normally would to your quilt sandwich. If you would like a little refresher on how to calculate how much fabric binding you will need, how to create binding, and then sew the binding onto the quilt, we have a blog called How to Bind a Quilt in 8 Easy Steps. Check out the link below. Step 2. Make sure you leave approximately a 10-inch space of unattached binding. This will allow you to maneuver and fold the quilt as needed. Step 3. At this point, place a pin in the center of the unsewn space. This pin is a helpful guide in cutting the fabric in our next step. Cut the binding off at the 1 1/4 inch mark. Now repeat this for the other side of the unsewn binding. Place the binding over the center pin. Using a ruler as a guide, measure out 1 1/4 inches below the pin. Again, cut the binding off to the length of 1 1/4 inches. Both ends of the binding should overlap by 2 1/2 inches, which again is the width of the binding used in this project. Step 5. Pull the lower binding out to the right of the quilt and open it up so that the wrong side of the fabric is facing down. Place the upper binding across the lower binding so that the pressed folds are at a right angle with each other and not lined up. The right sides of the fabric will face each other and the wrong sides of the fabric are facing outward. Pin to hold in place. Draw a line angled at 45 degrees from the outside corners of the pin bindings using a fabric marker. Sew along the line. Back stitch at the beginning and the end of the seam to hold the stitches in place. Trim the excess fabric to a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Either finger press or use an iron to press open the seam. Finish attaching the binding for the remainder of the quilt. Begin your seam where you left off and sew until all the binding is attached. Again, back stitch at the beginning and the end of these seams to lock the stitches in place. That's it. Your binding is attached using a miter finish. You can now either hand sew or machine sew the binding to the other side of the quilt, however you would like. Happy sewing!